Hello, I'm Amelia Santinella with CBSN Minnesota. We are getting an in-depth look tonight at what the Minneapolis City Council is doing in response to the recent uptick in crime. WCCO's Reg Chapman spoke one-on-one with Council President Lisa Bender. They discussed defunding the police, the future of public safety in Minneapolis, and much more. Here's that full interview.
So I guess the first question I want to ask you is crime a problem in our community right now, and do we have enough police to fight it?
One of the things that's so concerning right now is the amount of violence that's affecting our young people in Minneapolis. And this isn't new, but it's getting worse. And it's very concentrated. So in the last 25 years in our city, gun violence has been concentrated in only 18 city blocks in our city. In 2018, and I've asked for updated numbers, seeing the shifts of the pandemic affecting our community. But in 2018, 80% of gun violence victims were Black, and 70% were between the ages of 12 and 31. We have an epidemic of violence that's affecting young people in our community, and especially young Black men. And we need our whole community to come together to address this violence. To the second part of the question, I believe that our police department is an important part of interrupting this violence, but not the only solution. And we have seen over many years with nearly a $200 million police budget in place that this violence hasn't stopped and the cycles of violence haven't stopped. What is working is to work together with community, to bring in community partners, to match the right response to the right call for help, and to really work together with the folks who know our community to interrupt these cycles of violence. And supporting our young people has to be our #1 priority for everyone in Minneapolis.
Our Jennifer Merrily, reporter here at WCCO, did an interview with an MPD inspector who said there is no plan for crime, there is no planned crime, that there's no widespread public safety plan at all. Can you tell us, is there a public safety plan? And if there is, what is it?
I'm very concerned to hear a leader of our police department that has almost a $200 million budget say that they have no plan. I can tell you that it seems to be true when we hear from Mayor Fry, who directs the department, and Chief Arredondo, who I think is an important leader. We haven't heard a plan to address the violence in our community. And that's why the City Council is stepping in together with our constituents to demand a plan to really interrupt these cycles of violence that are highly concentrated. And we're seeing 3 kinds of violence right now. We're seeing gang and group violence and a lot of escalation and retaliation among very young people who need our support. We are seeing very young teenagers, 12 and 13, starting to do car theft and sort of escalating to armed robbery and other things that we need to interrupt in a way that's helping these very young kids get on the right track in a way that's interrupting that cycle so that our community is safe. And then we're seeing domestic violence on the rise. I mean, we know that domestic violence, especially for young people, really leads to community violence. So all of these things really need their own intervention. And I'm also concerned that our police department doesn't seem to have a plan. And that's what we need here. So we're stepping in and we are working to make sure that we have all hands on deck, that every single department in our city is part of this plan. I think we need a new city department, a Department of Community Safety that can take a more strategic approach to interrupting violence, to preventing violence before it happens, so that we're not so reactive and chasing crime after it happens with very little success. The solve rate for homicides and rapes are down. So we need to get a better plan in place. I couldn't agree more.
Is that your Lisa Bender plan for public safety? What is the Lisa Bender plan for public safety?
I don't direct the police department, but the city council is stepping in here. We passed a unanimous resolution to start the process of 3 things. So to build off of the work that's been underway for many years. Number 1, we're looking at things we can shift out of MPD to other city departments or partners. Things that police shouldn't be responding to. And if you ask law enforcement themselves, they'll tell you the same thing. Responding to overdose calls, mental health problems, homelessness, social issues really isn't what police are trained to do, and they're not doing it particularly well. So how can we match the better resource to the right call for help, probably using our city resources more efficiently in the meantime. Number two, we're looking to stop violence before it starts. And we are seeing good success with community-based violence prevention programs. We have a cure violence model being implemented right now, but for many years we've had Next Step, a hospital-based intervention system, and youth violence intervention systems that have been in place since 2006. And those programs are very effective at getting guns off the street. And again, they really need to be funded well so that those folks who are out there getting to know the community from the community are resourced the way they need to be effective. And then the third thing is we are looking at a way to restructure our city departments to do this work better. And this isn't unique to public safety. We have restructured our public works department to do a better job at designing streets. We've restructured our regulatory services department to do a better job at keeping renters safe and stably housed. Right now, our planning department is going through a restructure. It's not interesting, it doesn't grab headlines, but we restructure departments all the time to do a better job at delivering services that our constituents expect. And I think we need to restructure within our city how we're approaching public safety. And that's what the charter amendment that the city council unanimously proposed earlier this year was about. Unfortunately, the Charter Commission stopped this from being on the ballot this year when so many people are turning out for the presidential election. But I believe it will be on the ballot in 2021. And I'm glad our community will get a chance to weigh in on this important issue of our charter.
Now, some of these, the process you're talking about could take months, just to get, public input to do all this stuff like this. But a lot of your constituents were at the Public Safety and Health Committee doing a Zoom, and they were complaining about crime now. They want something done exactly now. What's your response to these community members who say they can't continue to live in these war zones?
Yeah, well, I mean, I live in my ward with my two young kids, and crime is up in parts of Ward 10 in Uptown. But we have for a long time enjoyed relative safety in our community. We are not one of the 18 blocks in the city that has had decades of violence. So I really support my constituents, the small businesses, in getting the resources we need. We have violence interrupters out on the streets in Uptown. But I am really concerned that our number one priority needs to be the safety of our young people and interrupting these cycles of violence that we're seeing among 12 to 30-year-old adults, kids and adults. And that's where we need to put the resources. And I agree, it's urgent. So that's why we, in the 2021 budget, the City Council increased funding for violence prevention. Those violence interrupters are on the street now, working to prevent violence before it happens.
Also, I sat down with former City Councilman Don Samuels. We sat on his front porch. He talked about him living in a war zone. A response to him and his neighbors. I mean, they have been complaining and saying that they can't continue to live this way, that they live in constant fear of their lives daily. There's gunshots daily, and it's been that way for the last almost 410 days.
I agree, it's unacceptable. And that is why during our recent budget conversation that I stated very emphatically that we need to prioritize those parts of our community that have been disproportionately impacted by violence for so long. And I know that we hear about the perception of safety in very wealthy neighborhoods that haven't had that kind of impact. And that is important too. Of course, we want everyone to feel safe, but our priority has to be the actual safety of our constituents who have suffered with violence for too long. Again, mostly young people, teenagers, being killed through gun violence and other kinds of violence. And we need to do everything we can to intervene right now to make that stop.
Your reaction to your constituents who say we need police on the street now. We need a heavier police presence to stop the crime. That's the only thing that's going to stop the shootings and the carjackings.
Yeah, I mean, our experience hasn't shown that police alone will interrupt these cycles of crime and violence, and that we need a more strategic and effective solution. So that's where I think we need to really learn from the experiences we've had in Minneapolis, as well as around the country. We're not the only city in the country right now that's seeing an unfortunate uptick in violence. And of course, it's affecting the same communities that are dying in large numbers from the coronavirus pandemic. The same communities that are suffering the economic impacts of either basically risking your life to go to work or who are out of work. And we are standing by as our federal government walks away from support for our working families, for our healthcare, for our small businesses. Our community is so stressed and so strained. And it is the very communities that are suffering from the pandemic, from the economic crisis, that are suffering this epidemic of violence. So we need to focus on this election coming up in November to get a federal government that will come in with support for our families, our neighbors in Minneapolis and around the country. And we need to put every resource we have locally here into the communities that are suffering the most.
We've talked to several people, especially community leaders, who say this call and plan to defund the police has been very dangerous. They actually relate that to why there's been a spike in crime, because there's talk of defunding the police. Your response to that people think that because you and the council members stood up and said, let's defund the police, this is when the surge of violence happened.
The surge of violence happened after George Floyd was murdered by MPD and after the police department took actions that led to 200 complaints against their behavior. It happened in the middle of a pandemic and an economic crisis, and it's happening all over the country. The city council stepped up and we unanimously passed a resolution directing our city enterprise to come up with a plan to keep our community safe. We need to stop this police violence. We have had a person killed at the hands of MPD every year or a year and a half or so. It will almost certainly happen again, and it's unacceptable. We need to make this violence stop. We need to make the police violence stop. We need to intervene in an effective way to keep our community safe. That's what the city council is stepping up to do because our constituents are demanding it. And really, this is not about the city council or any particular elected official. This is about our community. I mean, during the social unrest, when the fire department wasn't answering calls, when the police were nowhere to be seen, our community came together and kept each other safe. And those networks of safety in our neighborhoods are strong. We have folks actually asking us to keep the police away from their block because they are working together to watch out for each other. So I don't know if that's the right solution either, Chris, but that's what we're hearing from some of our constituents who feel that their own safety networks, again, in a part of the city that is relatively safe, is working well. And so again, to me, it is about putting those resources in the communities that have been disproportionately affected by violence for many years. The city council is right now reviewing the mayor's proposed budget. We will have some big decisions coming up, so our constituents need to get involved. We need to hear your voice. I am listening carefully to my constituents. I am hearing the need to communicate more. So we are putting out newsletters and videos, and we have now a website up that my office helped support staff to get out that describes all the different things that are happening with community safety in Minneapolis. So we're really, a community that is in a lot of pain from all of these things going on. But Minneapolis is coming together, neighbors are supporting each other. And now we just really need to make sure that in the blocks in Minneapolis where crime has been persistent, where crime is shifting and rising, that all hands are on deck, that we're working together to keep people safe.
I sat down and talked with a lady who lives in the 4th Ward. She lives in North Minneapolis. She just moved there. It's the only house she and her family can afford. She's terrified. Bullets are flying through her house. She looked directly in the camera and basically challenged you and the mayor to come live in her house for a weekend, come experience the gunshots, come experience the rapid fire. They are crying for larger police presence. They say they can't wait for public meetings to talk about interrupters and to talk about stuff like this. They have small children that cannot go out in the front yard and play. These people are crying out. Your response to them, they're saying you're not visible. They're saying you're not talking to them. They're saying they can't get in touch with their city council person to express their concerns. How do you make yourself more visible in your response to these people that you're actually listening to their pleas?
Well, I represent Ward 10 in Uptown and Whittier, but of course I have the honor this term of serving as council president. So I work really closely with my colleagues to support them in each of their wards. Anytime I am happy to attend a meeting with any of my colleagues. I really work to support them in the work that they're doing in their wards. We have 2 great council members representing North Minneapolis who I know are 100% focused on community safety, who are on the same porches and in the same backyards talking with folks about the violence, and who are really pushing the council to prioritize their community for resources. And they have my support. They have, I think, the support of the city council to make sure that those resources are going where they need to go. And in this upcoming budget, that I know will be part of our conversations, our priority is how do we make sure that the resources are going to the right neighborhoods, not to support a perception of safety, to support real safety in communities that are suffering.
Another question from our constituents: who has your ear? Who do you talk to about public safety? Who talks to you about public safety that helps you form your thoughts and opinions about how we should move forward?
Yeah, so in Ward 10, we attend community meetings. I hear directly from my constituents. Ward 10 is a place that has a large variety of life experiences, a lot of different economic circumstances. My ward is 80% renter. So we have some very long standing community members who've lived here for a long time, and we have lots of folks who live in Ward 10 for a very short period of time. And all of their opinions are important to me. So it's been really important, especially to me, that I really get in touch with the renters who live in my community, who haven't always been as engaged in community and the city government. So we've worked to really help get people involved in our neighborhood organizations and the various ways to have their voice heard at hearings. So for me, it's really important to hear from my constituents directly. And I know that is a priority for my colleagues on the city council. And as council president, I really work to support my colleagues as they engage with their own communities. And for each ward, that looks different in different places. I know Councilmember Ellison just had a community forum with Mayor Fry and Chief Arredondo to talk about the rise in crime in his ward and to hear a plan from the mayor and chief who direct the police department about what they're doing to address the crime in Ward 5. Ward 6 is another place where crime has been on the rise. They didn't have a council member all summer. So we have a new colleague that I'm working to support to make sure that he has what he needs to be successful as he's jumped into the pandemic and to an unfortunate rise in violence in the Cedar Riverside community. So for me, it's really about engaging directly with my ward as a Ward 10 council member and then working together with my colleagues to support them in each of their wards.
Do you have a relationship with Chief Arredondo? Do you have a relationship with President Bob Kroll of the police union? Do you talk to them about public safety at all?
I talk to Chief Arredondo pretty frequently, as well as I talk to Mayor Fry very frequently. Of course, again, in Minneapolis, the police department reports to the mayor. I talk with our health department staff who are working on violence prevention, our city coordinator, the governor's office. I'm on the criminal justice coordinating committee that has everything from prosecutors to defenders to the sheriff's office and all kinds of community partners. And then we've also seen safety issues in all kinds of ways this summer in Minneapolis. So, of course, issues of social unrest and property damage from fires. We've seen an enormous increase in people living unsheltered in our parks and on city land, and those have become incredibly unsafe. And so I've had many conversations with folks who are working to support our homeless encampments, trying to get people inside into safe places. So all of that, I think, is part of our approach to community safety.
The New York Times article you talked about, the pledge to defund police created confusion in the community. Is confusion the right word that we should be using at a time when we're kind of divided?
When we stood on a stage with members of Black Visions Collective and Reclaim the Block, I stand by the commitment that I made in the park, in Powderhorn Park, after George Floyd was murdered by the police. We need a wholly new approach to community safety in Minneapolis. We need to prevent crime before it happens, and our current system is not working to keep people safe. I'm also deeply concerned about this police department. We can't afford this police department, not in the harm it causes to our community and not in the dollars that it costs to taxpayers from all of these settlements related to police violence. So we need a lot of change in Minneapolis. I know folks who are opposed to change have taken that and worked to, I think, really try to stir up a lot of confusion. And so we are, I know, working really hard to be very clear with our constituents about this plan that the City Council brought forward in a resolution, directing staff to engage our community in a conversation about transforming public safety. We put together a very clear proposal for the charter amendment that was again stopped by the Charter Commission, but I know will be back likely on the ballot in 2021. So, I mean, it is obvious that folks in Minneapolis are ready for a conversation about how to move forward. It's obvious that we need to change our police department, change how we're approaching community safety to keep everyone safe.
Great. Last question. You're running for re-election next year. Why should people vote for you?
So right now I am really focused on the presidential election. We need a new leader in office. We need a new federal government that will support cities, that will support rural communities, that will support working families across Minnesota. So that's what I'm focused on between now and November 3rd.
There are a few ways that you can have your voice heard when it comes to crime in Minneapolis. First, you can reach out directly to your city councilor. Their email addresses and staff contacts are all listed on their bio pages. You can also sign up to speak at an upcoming meeting. They're all being held virtually now, so you can call in from your home. The Office of Violence Prevention has set up a timeline between now and December where it will do surveys and host community forums for what people want to see with the future of policing. We can connect you with all that information at WCCO.com/links.